Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. Super stoked to be part of this most auspicious occasion. We're going to talk about HEAL movement. And I was wondering if you could sort of just very briefly give me a breakdown of how you see what HEAL movement is.
Yeah, so heal movement is endeavoring to solve a pretty massive problem, which is basically that our technology has out accelerated our morality, that it's bringing us to these places that we don't have answers as far as what is right and what is wrong. You look at like AI, for example, and the opportunity that it brings really requires us to examine our values so we understand how we make decisions because it's literally making possible things that were not possible before. And the name heal movement points to this idea of heal as a counterpart to STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, that is a container for the humanities to be brought to bear to basically help us wrestle with these questions, to help us be better storytellers, to help us understand what keeps a community together and what alignment and coherence are in the human experience of all it is that we're building.
That's awesome. And if I understood correctly, when I was looking over the notes, it also pertains specifically to organizations and startups and things of that
It
nature,
does.
or is it more expansive in that sense, but through the
Yeah.
channel of startups and organizations?
Right. Thank you. That's where it's focused right now, right? Is like where we do our work is in the business world because that's, where we are. But obviously that kind of ambition has far reaching, applications. But leaders, right? Organizational leaders, that's where it has the most impact. Like we spend so much of our lives at work. And that is where our values are really, kind of realized. And so that is where we begin leadership development, company culture, and actually online community.
Now there's a long-term vision here behind sort of this effort, and I think we sort of alluded to it with
Mhm.
starting with organizations. But why don't you paint the long-term picture for us here too?
Yeah, sure. So, okay, the three levels that we work on are, online community. What is the culture that people associate with your brand? Company culture. What is the experience that employees have with your brand? And leadership development. What is the story that your leaders are telling about your brand? So all of that is organizational. It's marketing. It's customer service. It's these seemingly disparate functions of a business that all come back to the same thing. What does your brand mean? Right? What is the story that you are building that you're asking people, whether they're your leaders, your employees, or your customers, to be a part of?
I mean, one perfect example was in a moniker that was given to you, the shaman of Reddit, right? Of Reddit, right?
Yeah.
Which is like that's a
Yeah.
perfect example of brand and the power, the impact of hearing that. How did that name come about?
Yeah, I mean that's where I'm coming from. That was my job and that's the way that I approached it because a lot of the mandate of the work that I had was, creative strategy for brands looking to find their belonging on the platform. But a lot of that was achieved by being able to understand and articulate what Reddit is, which is a very oddly shaped object. And so that required a little bit of, kind of neuroplasticity of being able to tell one story a lot of different ways, but keep a vision and alignment. And there it is in that sense, right? I just said, like, keeping that vision. So vision keeper is what people are pointing to when they use a word like shaman. And shaman is a word that has a lot of baggage, but that was the head of HR at the time that gave me that name because I wasn't just leading the creative strategy, but I was also doing meditations for, the employees, tarot readings for, everybody at the company, clients sometimes as well. And, just kind of energy clearing offices and asking some deep questions about who we are, right? As a company, what does that mean for our brand? And then how do we tell that story? So I slid into a lot of different functions, even though, as far as I saw it, my mission was the same. It was sort of like the difference between a vocation and a job. I had a lot of different jobs, but my one vocation was vision keeper, which they describe as shaman.
You know what I like about all of this, especially with your background in music. I think I remember seeing a video on your website about a
Mhm.
story where your father took you to see the Wallflowers and what music means
Yeah.
to you, and you know how that it's awesome to see that there's this personal side to your life that you've been able to bring into the work that you're going to be doing in a world where, I mean, let's face it, everything is getting automated. People are getting burnt out. You know, there's too much tech and we haven't prepared for it, and the scaling. So I'm curious how much of your personal life with music and everything sort of inspired this. Is this sort of the culmination? You've reached a point where you're finally able to take all that you are and put it to service for the world?
Yeah, I love all that you just brought up. Thanks for reading into all that. That's really kind. I'll share a story that I haven't shared in any public forum yet. So, um, we're we're gonna go into some real hippie stuff here. So, my when I was a kid, my dad, he brought me to a drum circle, right? And he basically said, "Watch this. Watch what I do." And he sat there in the drum circle with this one drum that we had that was like kind of loud enough to sort of cut through all the noise. And all he did the whole time is just keep the pulse. It was just like boom, 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 and kept the tempo. And everybody was aligning around that pulse. Like he was just really holding it down. And I went on to be a bass player, and the bass player's job is, fundamentally the same as that. There's a lot of action that's going on. Your job is to ground it in a way that makes it all make sense. You can even actually, without getting into the music theory of it, when there's a lot of dissonance, disharmony, a bass player can play one note that makes it all sound good. And that's a very, very powerful thing when combined with that principle of rhythm as well too. So in that sense, I mean, think about the applications of that kind of approach to interconnection and people that, goes well beyond music. And that's what my
That's
whole
what a
thing is,
CEO should be, right? The one that
right?
sets the tone and
Exactly.
harmonizes all the dissonance. Absolutely.
Exactly.
No,
Exactly. And there's
I'm
there's
picking it up.
humility in it too, right? There's power and humility in it at the same time, and discipline.
I love this. And let's talk a little bit about, before we get into the actual, maybe the nuts and bolts of things, just a little reveal there. Are
Yeah.
there any clients you're excited that you've already started to take this to task with, or is this earlier in the process?
So yeah, we work with a lot of clients. We're in the process of making that shift from consultancy to much more fleshed out business. And with that, like a lot of the work that you do is private. But like
Right.
partners that we've had in the past, they kind of straddle a lot of different levels. And so on the consumer side, like brands that people might recognize, we've done some work with Turo, which is a great
Yeah.
yep. And so, um, really interesting brand that is doing something progressive that, there's like how do you help people understand what it stands for, right? And then another brand that we've worked with that really represents the other end of the spectrum is a brand called Anawa, which is a global collective of indigenous elders that have a lot of knowledge to offer, and they're offering some stories and some frameworks and wisdom that the modern world has never received, and they're doing it because they're like, you're in trouble, you need our help. And that has been just an utterly, enlightening partner to work with. And then another partner that kind of stretches between those two, I'd say, is Meow Wolf, which is
Oh.
a credible, live in person, experiential, company. So they have like interactive IRL spaces that you can go in, like Santa Fe, Las Vegas, Denver. They're launching one in LA, and they are powered by artist collectives that create these experiences, but they're also in the world as, a recognized brand and business that is supporting that. And I think that those three represent the kind of spectrum of, the businesses that we work with. We work with brands that make money and brands that make meaning, and some combination of the two.
I mean, I think that's the $1 million question here: is how does a company know if their North Star is purpose or profit? Is that a fair question to
Mm.
ask?
Yeah, yeah. Well, profits change. but purpose, kind of abides a bit longer. And if you're clear on your purpose, you can endure a lot of transition. And that's really where we're endeavoring to work is yes, like we can address some short term, projects in the domain of online community or, cohesion between teams inside of a company. But the real good work is long term, which is like, what is our purpose? And because if you're clear on that, you're now planning not quarterly, but annually, even on the level of decades. And your strategy is generational. We have opportunities right now to build and launch those strategies because there is so much change that is happening. But if you're too focused on the short-term change right now, I mean, you're sunk, right? You actually have to have a combination of short-term and long-term planning in this moment. So it comes from that balance between prioritizing your purpose and your profits.
I want to get into sort of painting a picture for what it's like to work with you and the team at Heal Movement.
Mhm.
What does an engagement begin to look like at the outset, so that companies that may be listening
Yep.
understand?
Like anybody in the strategy space, we have our frameworks. And so, whatever level we're working on, right? If it's leadership development or company culture or online community, we use something that we call the mind, body, spirit method. And we basically operate from this idea that like culture is what makes us human at scale. And how do you understand first what a culture is? Well, you break it down to its constituent parts of mind, body, and spirit. So, mind is language. How is a culture explaining its values, right? And the body is the tools. What are the tools that a culture uses to express its values? And then spirit is rituals. What are the moments? What are the memories? What are the routines that a culture uses to experience its values? And there's a taking inventory. And what is great about online community is it's all right there. You can literally see it. You can kind of like, especially Reddit, which is like not as transient as the rest of social media. You can look like, what are people saying? What are the actual phrases that they're using? And, I call them curiosities. I write about that in my book a little bit. Like the instinct that you focus on is you look at something, you're like, what is circle back, right? What
Right,
is that
right.
phrase circle back? Why do we say that, right? What does that invoke? So that's a language that implies a ritual and then is used in the tools of emails, right? And meetings, Zoom, right? That basically articulates the culture of the working world. So we look for stuff like that. And that is kind of step zero of building a culture strategy because first you have to understand it.
That's so. I mean, I can't believe someone hasn't written a song about "Circle Back" yet, or "Hope This Finds You Well," or or
Yeah,
anyway.
what is Jesse what is it? Jesse, I could see him doing something like that.
No, it's awesome because sometimes we can look at something like the history and the age of like when hair metal rock took the stage, and it was pretty clear that's what people were doing. People were at the Rainbow Lounge on Sunset Boulevard, all these things that an anthropologist looking back in history would
Mhm.
look at. And what you're saying, there are these emergent behaviors, these things that are already happening in your organization that you can use to uh, as a catalyst to advance the overall purpose, but they all have to be aligned, like you said, mind, body, soul. Was it
Spirit, yep.
spirit?
Yes, and I would add to that, you can extend that framework of thinking to a marketing strategy where
Okay.
if you wanna enter a market, if you wanna enter a culture, you take that same inventory and you ask, "Where can I add value?" And you just nailed it, like, a musician literally does this because they see something in culture and they add value by writing a song about it.
Yeah, no, this is right. So products and services can be
Yep.
developed specifically once you understand the culture. And we talk about like personas, for example, in marketing, right?
Mhm, mhm.
But what you're saying, like you said, culture is humanity at scale. Did I understand that
Yeah,
correctly? Or am I getting that wrong?
yeah.
Right. And so I think I'm beginning to see how this is shaping and what an engagement would look like with you. What are some of the most interesting things you've been able to find in working with? I mean, first of all, being able to work with conglomerate of elders and have that information be online, and that's already interesting in itself, just as a case study, right? And then
Yeah.
knowing that you come from the world of Reddit, so tech and startup is not foreign to you. You also have the arts background. There's a lot of things that are sort of coming together to show the value prop here. But are there any other interesting things that you've come to experience in this line of work so far?
Every day. So I think that I'm very attuned to thinking about things on like an industry level or a collective level. And
Okay.
so it's been really interesting to see and contribute to the business industry, not just marketing, but leadership as well, coming around to understanding the power of community. And that was something that, we really championed at Reddit early on. And so to have experienced firsthand the cycle from saying you really need to be thinking about community to being met with like complete blank stares from business leaders not understanding what that means, to now where we are today where, some of those very same leaders are like, we need to have a community strategy. And we
Yeah,
need to have it yesterday.
and sometimes it's a vanity metric to most people in business to believe, oh yeah, we've got followers, but you don't want followers. You want an active, engaged community. This is something you help people build as well.
Yeah, yeah. And so there's, I do a lot of speaking and, I go to conferences and just kind of, have a voice out there, and I keep a lot of my attention on, the ebb and flow of what is happening on an industry level. And I guess I'm getting old because I've seen a couple of cycles go by now where, like I remember the emergence of brand safety. I remember the emergence of video as a, media format priority. Like
Right.
I, contributed to the emergence of community. I am one of the many people who became a cultural trend forecaster, but like now we're, I think, at the beginning arc of the rise of culture as something that businesses are literally hiring for now, but it hasn't quite yet been defined. And so I work at the space of definition when things are emerging and people know that they need to prioritize it, but it hasn't yet been crystallized into best
Right.
practices.
Now, is this what your book and your podcast are generally about, or can you tell me a little bit more about that if I'm wrong?
Yeah, yeah. So the book and the podcast use basically the framework that is my method, and it is a way to think creatively like only humans can. And so you ask these strategically open questions. What's in front of me? What's behind me? What am I receiving? What am I giving? What do I rest upon? What shines upon me? To then triangulate what's in your heart. And so inside of that is a method that I dearly, dearly wish more people, cultivated as a skill, which is to see anything from multiple different angles, and to do so by isolating aspects of the big question that you're asking into bite-sized chunks, and then just let those stories sort of express themselves. And so the book follows that format. This is literally the meditation method that I've been teaching for years. And so there's a literal way of experiencing that. Like you close your eyes and you imagine what is in front of you and then behind you. But there's also a figurative way of doing that on, a notebook page, like answering those questions. What is in front of our business? What are we moving towards? What is behind us? What are we coming from, receiving? What is our supply chain? What are we giving? What is our messages that we're putting out there? What do we rest upon? What are our assets, right? Things like that. What's shining upon us? Why now? And it's the podcast is a teaching just by repeat. So I use that as an interview format to we just walk through the questions with any given guest and we just see what comes up. And it is something that I feel is very much at that early arc of I don't think that a lot of people really understand what I'm doing, and that's okay. But I believe that in a little bit of time, it's going to be really clear what kind of method this is, and that method, I hope, will be seen as one of the primary methods of being human as a leader in a world where a lot of our tools are AI, because that's where it brings you is into the heart of your humanity. And I hope that leaders of tomorrow will ask themselves, have we asked which way is north on this? Because that defines the whole method of digging deep into the heart of the questions you're trying to ask so you understand what decisions to make.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to watch which companies have decided, what direction with the adoption and integration of machine learning and AI as a whole into the organization. And it's
Yeah,
it's kind of the thing where some of them are thinking, yeah, maybe we can just run our entire backlog of data and our entire database and just have it run through inference, and it'll tell us what
sure.
we need. And that's one way of doing it. But you know you yourself as a consultant know that you could tell someone exactly what they need to do to get their business to where it needs to go and grow because they want it to get there, and they still won't do it
Hmm.
because things aren't aligned, right? And this
Hmm.
is where I think the humanity aspect of things comes in, and working with people to help you get there, as opposed to just a tool, because a tool can tell you the answer, but it can't do it for you. One might
Yeah,
argue agents can, but can they? Maybe, but not all things. Not with your people, right?
at
Can you
some
imagine a
point,
world where agents are managing people?
I can, but I don't know if I like that world.
Right, 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 and that's kind of what we're talking about here with the cultural alignment. If I'm understanding this correctly, you
Hmm.
don't have to manage anymore. You just have to check in and make sure everyone's still feeling the spirit of the culture of the company,
Yeah,
because then an aligned culture manages itself. Is this what I'm understanding?
it does. Yeah. And so there's a really important phrase in the AI space, which is human in the loop. And we're not talking about that enough. And basically, is the realization, it comes from researchers, that at some point you need a human to make a decision, no matter what. You know, yeah, I wrote an article for Spin Magazine about this, and I started the article describing, I'm blanking on his last name, but Stanislav, this Russian military officer, that all of his buttons were beeping on his terminal that basically decides whether or not Russia launches all of its nukes in a retaliatory strike. He instinctively felt that there was an error in the system, and he did not proceed. He made a choice, and that human in the loop is why we are still here today,
Yeah,
live, right? And that is an extreme example of the importance of having a human in the loop. But you can automate so many different things. But at the end of the line, at some point, a human has to make a decision, and how they make decisions is where they have value. And this is something that artists and musicians understand intrinsically. There's the graphic designer that charges thousands of dollars for 1 hour of work, and when they get challenged on that, right, they say, no, you're not paying for an hour of my work, you're paying for 20 years of my experience so that I can make the right decisions for you quickly. We already know what this is, right? And
yeah.
so we just have to maintain that.
No, it's something I run into myself as a podcast producer for people. Often they're like, I could just find someone on Fiverr or this or that or whatever the case may be. I go, yeah, you could for the task, but for the product itself, that's an entirely different thing. And so I love that you're bringing that
Yeah.
up, because there's so many things that are lost. I mean, I tried vibe coding something fairly recently and to great success. But prior to all that, the failed attempts, there were many a time where the agents would just try to work on a bug and then make it worse and eventually make it irreparable to the point where I
Yeah.
couldn't even use the product I had spent a week and a half building. And that's just an example of, at scale, that would be absolutely terrible to happen to an enterprise company that decided to integrate this without having things aligned, and having good counsel that can help them understand that. And so,
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it, like at scale. And if you're traveling light years away to another star, right, and you're off by like 0.001% in your trajectory, that's a huge problem over great distances, right? And it's the same thing with scaling a business. If your value system, the way that you make decisions, is even slightly out of alignment, then all of these AI tools are going to accelerate your culture of failure if it's a culture of failure, just as they will accelerate your culture of success if it's a culture of success.
that couldn't be a better place to roll out the red carpet for you and just say, like, where do you want listeners uh, to go and visit you, connect with you, reach out to you?
Yeah. So I'm on social at Will Cady, Cady. That's how you spell my last name. WillCady.com. It's my website. Heal-movement.com is our business website. My book and my podcast are Which Way is North. And also my music's on Spotify under Will Cady, Cady. And there's some of it out there. So there are a lot of ways to encounter me. But please say hi. I love humans. So I love talking with people.
Right on. And Heal Movement, the website, it's a .com, if I'm
Yep,
not
dot
mistaken.
com. Heal-movement.com.
All right. Well, there it is. Well, I can't thank you enough for stopping by. It's been an absolute pleasure. Very interesting conversation. I feel like I could have taken it in other places, but I was trying to constrain, because I'm having too much fun here. But thank you for stopping by.
Yeah, thanks for having me.